Hey folks, it's Adriel the Hunting Gear Guy. Today it's a little bit too hot in my house to run these big lights, so I've just relocated to a different room. And today I wanted to show you guys this Savage Rascal. This is a single shot 22. It's kind of designed for kids just getting into the sport kind of a thing. Very easy to operate because there's not really a lot to it. And most importantly, what we've got here with this rifle is this very short length of pull on this stock. Now, if you've got a kid between, let's say, 4 and 8 or 9, what you've seen them do when you try to get them going on a regular 22 is that their arms aren't long enough to get around this buttstock. So on a normal 22. So what you'll see them, they can't actually get around here. Now on an adult, you end up with like a bunch of extra arm, and that's an issue all to itself. But for kids, they just can't even reach around to grab the trigger. So what they end up doing is they end up putting the stock over their shoulder so they can reach the trigger, or they end up going over it, or they end up using 2 hands, or any number of really poor shooting techniques kind of to get started. So the idea with a rifle like this is that it has a nice short length of pull. They can get their arms around it and pull the trigger without having really terrible form. So let's look at a couple of the things that make this rifle, I think, great as a first rifle. Now we spoke about the length of pull here. That's by far the most important thing on this rifle, is just being able to fit the child that's shooting it. So some of the other features that you might notice here, one, we've got an accu-trigger here, so you know, I don't know if with kids if it really matters all that much having a heavy trigger, but I know that this one is a little bit lighter, it's a little bit more adjustable, and it's safe, so it's not the worst thing to have out there, right? We've got a safety that's up on the side here. And let's just zoom in there. You can see with that safety, we've got red for fire, and we've got S for safe. So very easy to see, very easy to understand what's going on with that. It's a little bit clicky, but this is not meant to be a hunting rifle. This is meant to be a training rifle, so that clickiness is fine. A little bit more to the rear here, we've got this rear peep, and this is kind of interesting because I think it's got some features that aren't necessarily required in a rifle like this. Just keeping in mind, I consider this like a first rifle, something to get a kid started in the shooting sports. But Savage has introduced a couple of features on here to make it so that you could, I guess, expand it into more of a first hunting rifle even for small game. So we've got this thumb adjustable windage here, so we can actually just loosen off this guy and then move it side to side because it's just threaded into this piece over here. And then on the opposite side, we've also got a thumb screw adjustable elevation. So by unscrewing this thumb screw here, what we do is make it so that rear sight can move up or down. So that's going to give us our elevation. And it's very easy to set back where it was because it has a mark right at the rear here. All we have to do is align that and then tighten that thumb screw to get back to where we already were. So that's our rear peep. Nothing wrong with that. You know, I think it's a little bit much for a first rifle, given that this stock is only really going to be good for a kid for a few years, I think, before you'd want to get them onto a bigger 22. Now just moving a little bit forward to the bolt here, nothing too crazy. We've just got a standard pull it up and pull it back kind of a bolt. We do have this shell riser that's kind of helping with feeding in here. And I'll just show you what that's supposed to do. It's actually spring loaded, so it kind of springs down into this cavity here. And all it's doing is helping to guide the shells that we drop in there into the chamber. This is just a test around, and you can see that it just goes in there, and as this bolt goes forward, it pushes that feed ramp down. So just a somewhat of a special feature for this single shot, I guess, is just the fact that it's got that guy in there. Now the top of the receiver is drilled and tapped for scope mounts, but I'm going to show you why I don't really think that this is a great rifle to scope in just a little bit here. But it does have them if you're really interested, and you don't have to deal with dovetails, which is, I don't know, kind of nice. Now, a couple of other really quick features here. We do have sling studs rear and forward. Again, that speaks more to a first game hunting rifle, so something that you might take gopher shooting or squirrel shooting or something like that, rather than a first trainer. But I can't really fault the extra features on this rifle, except for the fact that, you know, I think that this rifle could be made cheaper. And you know, if you look at the stock, you'd think, well, it's already pretty cheap. This thing in Canada here, it's right around $200, which is actually a lot more than a standard 22. It's a lot more than something like the Marlin 795, and it's very similar in price to a full size magazine fed 22, like the I don't know, the Savage Mark II or something like that. So, you know, we're not actually getting a lot of capability for the price that we're putting into this thing, except in these places where, you know, yes, the rear sight can be adjustable with elevation and windage. We do have these scope mounts, and we have this excellent trigger. You know, I think in terms of this rifle, I would have rather had less of these features, a more stripped down rifle, something that was more inexpensive. Because just due to the length of the stock and due to the fact that this is a single shot, I like that it's a single shot. I think that a single shot for a first time user is the right way to go. But it does limit the lifespan of this rifle. This rifle should be, like a trainer like this, should be used for the first few years of the shooter getting used to it, while their arms aren't quite long enough, so using a short stock like this makes sense. And then after that, we can move them to a youth bolt action with a magazine, or a youth size stock with a semi-auto or something like that. So while I still like the idea of running a single shot, I think the cost on this one is just a little bit too much for what you can do with it and what you're probably going to do with it. And here you can see the rifle with these Savage supplied bases. These you get separately. I think I paid $15, but don't quote me on that. Savage does sell these bases. You can see that they stick up quite high on the rifle. It's kind of necessary to get that Weaver base in here. What that does is, from the factory setting on this rear peep, it does make it so that that front sight is just barely visible past the bottom of this. So you lose a little bit of your visibility using your iron sight. You can see here that I think if this was a rail, this would be a lot easier to do with a red dot, or if we had more base available back here, this would be easier to mount a red dot. There are some red dots out there that do just fine with one Weaver base, and if you find one of those, I think that's going to be the ticket on this. But that being said, make sure it's got a really low mount, because this stock, this comb, the way that it droops down here, is built to look through this rear peep sight. And if you end up trying to tackle putting a higher red dot on here, you're going to gain yourself another 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and then your kid is going to have difficulty getting a good cheek weld and being able to see through that red dot sight. So I don't know if that's a real big issue. It's just, you know, when I look at this thing, I just don't think it's a really good match for using these bases. I think using the factory iron sights is the way to roll with something like this, and that you know, it's a little bit much to tackle. It would be kind of nice to run a red dot, so that when you're teaching your kid how to shoot, you can teach other fundamentals like safety and working the bolt and working the trigger without having to do sight alignment as well. I don't really see a really great way of doing it with this rifle. Maybe some other ones would be better suited to running a red dot, or maybe there's a red dot out there that would be nice and low on this Weaver. I just don't know about it. But I wouldn't recommend going with the bases. I would just recommend going with the sights. Use this thing like it's supposed to be used, which is like a trainer. They can start, your kids can start with this. They can fire to their heart's content for a couple of years, and then once they really get into it, you can move them to a magazine-fed bolt, or you can move them to a semi-automatic 22 and they'll have learned all they can from this rifle. So again, I just wanted to make a real quick review of this Savage Rascal. Thanks for watching.